Yeah, this book is right. I just gave it to a St. Cloud State professor last Monday or Tuesday, and by Thursday she said, I've seen enough of it. He's not a geologist. And it's like, well, Darwin wasn't a biologist either, you know? And so, yeah, so what I'm trying to do, and what I've been kind of busy lately, is at St. Cloud State, I want to make a creation college, or a creation club. So I went there and I got, I have a question of the day, and I did a survey. If you want to meet students, do a survey. And I got a marker board, and I asked, hey, did we get here by blind chance or creation? You know, blind chance. It's like, do you think that building got put together by blind chance? That's absurd, right? And they agree. It's like, well, how much more absurd is it to think our bodies got put together by chance? And then they start to think, and it's like, well, you're only getting one perspective of the past. That's the blind chance perspective. And if that's all you ever see, you just memorize. You need to see both sides if you want to think, and there's a creation perspective, and you're not getting it. And I'll have different questions of the day. Oh, and by the way, creation won by a landslide there. And in spite of all that billions of dollars and all those textbooks, people don't buy the blind chance evolution. And this one, did hydrogen and helium turn into people? Because that's what the Big Bang says. Hydrogen and helium and a little bit of lithium from the Big Bang, here we are. And that was really close. Actually, the people who thought that happened actually won, and then 4 more people came by and tipped the tables. And then this one, should false information be removed from the textbooks? And that's what I'm talking about on Tuesday night. So if you can get to, what is it, E-Free in Hastings on Tuesday night at, 6:45, you're going to be able to see the errors that are in the textbooks and how the school board responds to those errors. And my assumption was everybody wants accurate textbooks, and I'm disillusioned. That thing shattered. They don't want accurate textbooks. They didn't want to see what proved them wrong. But I had that there, and there was 3 girls that were just yelling at me. They were very emotional, and they were yelling at, it's a bad question. It's like, what's bad about that? And she said, well, you're trying to get so he can't teach evolution in school. It's like, you're telling me that you can only teach evolution if you have false information in the books? Is that what you're telling me? And so, but that's true. Evolution is false. You can't prop it up with truth. You have to prop it up with lies. And then another one, it's, do you have a spirit or a soul? I just want them to start thinking about that. And yes, one there. And I'm trying to get a club going at our community college. And I did the same thing there. And again, creation won by a landslide. When you put it in those perspectives, and then I pointed out some errors in the textbooks, and got to speak to the school board a couple of times. And if you want to see what I said, I've got cards. They're in the back. I got a YouTube channel, and you can see some of these talks. And I'll go into more depth on Tuesday, but you're going to get there and get as many people as you can on Tuesday. Because as taxpayers, we should not be funding errors. And this is my YouTube channel. It's Solidify Your Faith. And again, you can see those things are in that's me talking at the school board. You get 3 minutes. I think they might be my next mission field. But then we've got Creation Science 101, so you can start there. Let's dive into this talk, the hydroplate. Who knows about the hydroplate? Has anybody, who does not know about the hydroplate? Okay, so we're going to take some minutes, but let's just get some background here. Thomas Chamberlain, 100-some years ago, really smart guy, a lot of, head of the first geology department in Chicago, published a lot of papers, and he said that researchers should always have or seek to have multiple working hypotheses. So kids can compare and contrast, they can analyze, they can sharpen their analytical skills. He said, because if you just have one dominant hypothesis, you just memorize and conform. And that's what we're seeing today. But let's just see what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say about this.
This is world-renowned astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, a scientist, explaining why you and everybody out there shouldn't ask questions. Watch.
There's a list of top-ranking medical professionals. Just take a look.
I'm talking about, excuse me,
Dr. Peter McCullough. No, I want to go through what happened
consensus.
Here. This is the problem with the consensus.
The consensus.
Okay,
medical professional.
I want you to
because the medical is so huge. I can find you an astrophysicist who is sure we've been visited by aliens. That's not the
problem
consensus.
was the scientific method died here, and this is the point I want to make. It died a death here, and I need you to help me save it because Dr. Peter McCullough is the leading cardiologist.
I don't care if titles don't matter here.
But what should matter?
They don't matter.
What
matters
should matter?
Is the consensus. I'm not interested in medical pedigree. I'm interested in medical consensus, in scientific consensus.
Scientists that were on the ground, that were dealing with patients, were being censored, were being shut down. Their YouTube channels were being shut down. Their LinkedIns were being shut down.
Because the individual scientist does not matter.
So let me get this straight. The scientist doesn't want you to follow the scientific method because it goes against the scientific consensus, even if the consensus was wrong. And it's not just the vaccines. The consensus did the same thing with COVID. Remember when Fauci and company said COVID came from a wet market? That lab leak theory went against the fake consensus. If you mentioned it, you got censored and smeared as a crazy person. Hey, kook, the coronavirus came from a bat. Definitely not the coronavirus lab around the corner.
Yeah, and it's been wrong a lot. And I told that to a professor. Several years ago, I gave this book to a professor because they don't have a theory for Grand Canyon. And she, to her credit, she wanted to see it. And I told her about this, you know, how they should always have multiple working hypotheses. And she says, that's not how we do science. So they've got that groupthink of consensus going, and they're wrong. It's been wrong a lot in the past. You know, that was wrong about the geocentric universe. It was wrong about spontaneous generation and uniformitarianism and its vestigial organs and junk DNA. The consensus is wrong a lot. And this open letter to the scientific community says, the Big Bang Theory relies on a growing number of hypothetical entities, things that we have never observed, inflation, dark matter, and dark energy. However, today, virtually all financial and experimental resources in cosmology are devoted to the Big Bang studies. Yeah, self-sustaining irrespective of the scientific validity. So that's what you have. You got the people in charge. They don't want things to change because they got the power, and they're trying to silence alternative views. And they've been wrong a lot. You know, this is, who remembers the Hubble Deep Field image? They're looking way back in the universe. They thought they'd see universes being formed because we've been here billions of years. And Bob Enyart says, he goes, I know we're not here billions of years, so you're just going to find normal galaxies, and that's what they found. And they made the same mistake with the James Webb Space Telescope. And it's such a laughing stock. Now, Jason Lyle, he predicts that their predictions are going to be wrong. And then he also predicted, once they know they're wrong, they're going to say that galaxies formed much sooner than expected. And he was right both times. And that's what they found. Everyone was freaking out. At stake was nothing less than our very understanding how the orderly universe we know emerged from primordial chaos. So it's just a mess. Maybe there's something happening in the early universe that means it's easier for some galaxies or stars to form. And so that's exactly what Jason predicted. And then there's a place of massive galaxies that shouldn't exist, but yet it's bananas. These galaxies should not have the time to form. Well, that's because your blind chance theory is wrong. When are you going to give it up? And I'm going to the court of public opinion. You know, they lose their power when we stop believing their lies. So just get educated and help other people get educated, and we can get a snowball of educated people that wipe those lies out of the textbooks, and then we can stop wasting money, and you're going to see a lot of that. And we still didn't expect with James Webb's to see such mature galaxies. They made the mistake with Hubble Deep Field, and then they made the same one with James Webb. And the one that really bothers me about consensus is Ignaz Semmelweis. He was the guy who figured out you should wash your hands after doing an autopsy. Who thinks that's a good idea? Wash your hands after doing an autopsy. But he was met with ridicule. This is 1847. Because what he realized was there was two wings of the hospital, and the babies were dying over here after birth, and the ones weren't over there. They had a higher death rate here, the moms and the babies, than in the other wing. And he figured, what's the difference? Well, in this wing, the nurses delivered them, and in this wing, the doctors delivered them, and they did the autopsies in the morning. And so they had a higher death rate, and they ridiculed him. Even though later on, he had a hospital that had a death rate under 1%, and they had a 10 to 15% death rate. He had the data. But they don't want things to change because now you got this cognitive dissonance. They don't want to be responsible for all those deaths. So it's just easier to shut up the guy with the data. And again, we're seeing a lot of that. And it was said it was time to stop this nonsense about chlorine hand wash. That was his solution. That's what fixed the problem, and they still won't listen to him. And so sometimes science advances one funeral at a time. We need a few more funerals, I think. But so we just need the younger ones. And it's actually the Semmelweis reflex. Long-held ideas can remain entrenched despite potent evidence to the contrary, and people can and do persecute those who challenge the consensus, even when the consensus is wrong. And that's where we're living, folks. In a lot of different areas, they only let you see one side of the perspective, and you need to see both sides if you want to think. And I've got a YouTube channel. Everybody should get a card there. That's my YouTube channel. If you want I've also got a Rumble channel called Education, Not Indoctrination, where you can see other things that get censored on YouTube. Okay, so up to plate with the Hydroplate, up to speed. We had our very first Hydroplate conference in the fall because they won't let our papers be published. And so I was promoting this at our state college in town, and somebody stole the poster. It's like, and I talked to the students, it's like, is that offensive to you? None of the students think so. But you know what I think is offensive? Is this cover of Microscopy Today, which shows nerve cells in dinosaur bones. Nerve cells, that's going to freak out a dinosaur or a professor who knows, she's a Big Bang proponent. She doesn't want to lose the, whatever. But anyhow, the poster was taken, so we reported it, put it up again. It was taken again. And they know who did it, but they won't tell if it's student, faculty, or staff, and they won't make them pay for it. So that's what's happening in there. And if there's anything that bothers me, I don't think there's anything bothers me more than censorship. It's like, okay, you're going to censor it? So I I had a table at the school. See what poster thief wants censored, And so then students wanted to see, hey, what's being censored? And then, up until then, it was pretty slow on campus. And then we got the attention. We had the Hydroplate there. We had 3 PhDs speak. You can see these talks at hydroplate.org or else on YouTube and Rumble. And one PhD, he was a professor of aeronautics at the U.S. Air Force Academy. So there's very well-credentialed people that are banging this Hydroplate drum. But if you can only watch one, look at Kevin Lee's Hydroplate talk, and we're going to talk about that more later. Because he was, 6 years before the DART mission, he emailed Dr. Brownlee and said, if you try to redirect an asteroid, it'll work if it's a solid rock, but it'll fail if it's a bunch of boulders, which is what the Hydroplate predicted. And guess what? It was a bunch of boulders. And he's just been hitting the ball out of the park. And then at NASA, they had a big blunder, wasted millions of dollars multiple times because they don't learn from the past. But anyway, they censored me. So it's like, okay, you censored me? We're going to put these flyers up all over campus. It says, see what a poster thief wants censored at SCSU, hydroplate.org. And then, and we did this at our local creation club because we meet once a month. And then they started to take down our flyers. It's like, oh, you're going to take down our flyers? Well, we'll do the same talk. We'll do it right on campus. And so that poster that would have been up there for only 2 weeks since they stole it, we had it up for 2 weeks for each time, so it was up a month and a half. And you can see this talk on my YouTube channel called Answers to Scientific Questions. And it's such a powerful theory. Somebody flew me down to Houston to give a talk at their creation club. And then he lined up a bunch of other talks, and it answers so many unanswered questions. And it's just an amazing thing. And if one theory can answer all those perspectives, why isn't it taught? And the last one, the 8th edition, it went for $30. The last one on YouTube went for $280. And somebody paid it because it's gone. And now it's 2018 or 2008. This one's a 2009 one. And that's a whole nother story. There's only a couple of dozen of them in existence. And Brian's got one. And so let's take a look at, let's do the Hydroplate before we get to that. The Hydroplate in 5 minutes, it's really tough. But just think of the Earth as a apple. Okay, it's got one assumption. The one assumption is half of the ocean was inside the Earth at one time. That's it. Okay, so think of the Earth as a big apple, and the skin is made of granite, 60 miles thick of granite. Then there's a mile of water underneath, and then it's basalt. That's it. Okay, and then you throw the laws of physics in there. The moon's going to tug on the Earth. So that's going to stretch and compress the crust. And back then, it wasn't broken into plates like it is today. It's stretch and compress. The water gets hotter and hotter. The crust gets hotter and hotter. Heat goes into the water. Water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. It wants to boil, but there's no room to boil. It can't expand. And then at 705 degrees and 3,200 psi, it becomes what's called supercritical water, where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So now it's dissolving the granite above and the basalt below and mixing it all together and making stuff like limestone and salts and silicates and carbon stuff. And a lot of cementing agents in there and a lot of salt. Okay, and then finally the crust gets so weak that it cracks. And now it's at, Walt Brown says, 372,000 psi. So incredible pressure erupting up to atmospheric pressure, 14.7. It just explodes out of there and it rips the crust in 2 directions. And that crack goes all the way around the world and comes back together. And all the water just erupts out of there, an explosion out of there. And people say, well, and then it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That's how it could do that. And then if, and people say, won't that leave a mark on the Earth? And it's, yeah, it did. It's called the Mid-Oceanic Ridge. That's the mountain range that goes around the bottom of the ocean, 46,000 miles. And it's because that was at the bottom of that eruption. So now you got two cliffs that are 60 miles high. They're getting eroded. That's where all the sediment comes from, for all the sedimentary rock. And they're getting wider and wider and wider apart. And eventually there's nothing pushing down on the mantle. The mantle bulges. So now those plates start sliding like a train. If you got railroad tracks, lift it up, the train's going to start rolling. Now the North America and South America are going to the west. Europe and Africa are going to the east, and they keep going until they meet resistance. And then the mountains form. That's why the mountains are parallel to the Mid-Oceanic Ridge, or Mid-Atlantic Ridge. All right? And so and some of this stuff was going with such tremendous force that not only did it get through our atmosphere, it broke out of our gravitational pull. So now you got this salt and carbon dioxide and mud and rocks up in outer space like dirty snowballs. Anybody know what's been described as a dirty snowball? Comets. That's exactly right. And so he said comets came from Earth. And Dr. Brownlee, he was the NASA scientist in charge of the Stardust mission, and he got that. He was supposed to get stuff from a comet back down to Earth, and Kevin Lee says, hey, you're going to find stuff from the Earth in that comet, and Dr. Brownlee says, no, we're going to find stuff from the Oort cloud in that comet, and he was shocked to find stuff from the Earth, and some of that stuff can only be made in liquid water. And it's very solid evidence for a very robust theory. And we're just going to listen to this. This is a talk that he gave just a couple of weeks ago at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association at the University of Northwestern a couple of weeks ago. And it updated us on that. So that's the backdrop for what he's going to talk about here. And he does, these are clips that are there. I encourage you to go in and watch them. And when you're at that YouTube place, it's like a big library. You want to see what creationists have to say about biology? There they are in a playlist. Geology, there they are. Astronomy, there they are. So it's a good way for you to get up to speed on what some really smart creationists are saying. And so let's listen to this one.
Because I had become a student of the hydroplate theory, I felt fully confident to communicate with Dr. Brownlee and to predict that what he would find was not what he was anticipating. I'm quoting now from his article, A Mission with Many Scientific Surprises. One of the most unexpected was the 2009 discovery of the amino acid glycine. Now, glycine it's an amino acid used by all life. How could the amino acids have been formed in the vacuum and near absolute zero temperature of space? He was shocked by this discovery. The finding that inner solar system materials formed at very high temperature were transported all the way to the edge of the solar system to the region where Pluto is one of the major scientific findings of stardust. But Dr. Brownlee can't explain how, but the hydroplate theory can say.
There's a shorts list too, so that was a minute long. You can share it on your social media, get this stuff out there. I think if we get enough people a little more organized, a little more motivated, I think we can really get this hydroplate into the mainstream. This is pretty telling too. This is a clip from a secular resource, and then he'll comment on it.
Scientists were able to find out one last surprising thing, the amino acid glycine. Amino acids are the building blocks that make up proteins that are vital for all living things. Although this does not mean that there was anything alive on Cometville 2, this does lend weight to the idea that it was from comets such as this, crashing into our Earth millions of years ago, that life's first building blocks found their way to our planet, which I'm sure you all agree offers a tantalizing glimpse into our own origins.
That's a horrible deception that is a result of not being out there with a voice, as all Christian creationists, flood scientists, people with Dr. Brown's 100% consistent with the hydroplate theory, 100% consistent with science, predicting all these things that they found. If we would have had that in the classrooms of colleges and universities, this would be foolishness to everybody. Why are you saying we were seeded by stuff that formed the building blocks of life in the absolute zero temperatures, near absolute zero temperatures, and total vacuum of space, when it can't be, they can't figure out how to do these things on Earth?
And he's right. If we would have been banging this drum for the last 40 or 50 years, we'd have so much scientific clout. And it bothers me. I can understand why secularists don't want this in the mainstream, but why don't creationists want it in the mainstream? That's the real puzzle. The longer I live, there's more and more things that just make no sense to me. He's made probably half a dozen, 8 or 9, accurate predictions that are just astounding, like what's in a comet. And so this one's going to be a little bit longer, I believe. It's their videos, and he comments on it.
The image NASA didn't want to receive from the Deep Impact probe. What they didn't want to see is a flash of light that kept them from seeing the crater that the impactor made. And the reason why there was a flash of light that blinded the camera was because they didn't have the right perspective of what made up the Temple 1 comet. Basically, NASA is now admitting about their failures in each one of these missions and trying to put a happy face on it while they're doing so. They're talking about how they sent the impactor to the Temple 1 comet to smash into it, and they wanted to do it in a way that they would be able to see the impact and see the crater that was made on what they thought was a solid comet.
And on the 4th of July, 2005, just 1 second out from the anticipated arrival time, the impactor hit. And what a magnificent spectacle it produced. Scientists were thrilled that they had struck so accurately. This produced the bright flash you see here, the energy of which is roughly equivalent to 5 tons of TNT. This flash was much brighter than scientists expected.
Much brighter, because they thought it was solid. And what the impactor did is threw up billions of pieces of fine dust, dirt, rocks that reflected the sunlight so much that it blinded their cameras from being able to see the impact.
However, ironically, the success of the first part of the mission caused an unexpected negative side effect. A large dust cloud was kicked up by the impact, which obscured the flyby's view of the impact crater. Dust outgassed from the comet for the next 13 days, peaking 5 days in, which made it hard to see the results of this interstellar bullseye. Although it did offer some interesting insights into the internal pressures going on inside the comet. Around 5 million kilograms of water and between 10 and 25 million kilograms of dust were ejected from Temple 1 in that time.
Which they did not expect. And we got to keep in mind, this was 2005, $240 million mission that, had it not been for the space probe Stardust having enough fuel, would have been a complete waste of money and therefore a NASA blunder.
Fortunately, scientists were able to rely on other eyes, at least to capture images of the...
And those other eyes are the Stardust mission.
Back to the late 1990s, when cometary science was even more patchy. Although by this point we had sent 6 probes up to visit these enigmatic celestial bodies, not very much was known about their origins. It was believed at the time that comets were foreign visitors to our solar system, older than the Sun, having been formed from the loose pre-solar grains of dust that orbit other stars, before drifting through space towards us, only to be caught up in the Sun's gravitational pull. It was believed that this theory could be confirmed by traveling to one of these comets and picking up some of this loose dust, or stardust, that surrounds them in space. By examining the isotopic composition, scientists would be able to tell if it was unusual when compared to the dust given off by our own star.
Visual surprises. So when the Stardust space probe got to the Wild 2 comet, they were shocked and surprised. This is a $200 million project. And so then we'll see what they say about that.
But on the 2nd of January 2004, it finally arrived at its target, Comet Wild 2. And what it found was immediately extraordinary. Scientists had not expected much from Wild 2. Some NASA scientists described their expectation of it to be a rather bland object looking somewhat like a black potato. However, this is not what they found.
And what they're saying is, it looks to us like they might be craters, but they're not impact craters like they would expect for something that was solid. It's a kind of impact crater you would expect for a very loosely held together rock pile that leaves a, crater impact kind of looks that are nothing like what you would hit solid. That's what they're missing here, is because they weren't expecting it to be a loosely held together rock pile.
Instead, the surface of Vil 2 was covered with spiky pinnacles hundreds of meters tall, cliffs, massive holes jetting dust and gas out into space, even on parts of the comet that were pointed away from the sun, and thus were expected to be less reactive. In short, the surface of the comet was unexpectedly alive and self-renewing. Something else was just as notable for its absence: craters. Unlike almost every other body in our solar system with surfaces exposed to space, there were no craters on the surface of Vil 2. This puts it in stark contrast to places like Mars or our own moon. Given the period of time Vil 2 is thought to have existed, it surely must have encountered other objects which impacted with it. So where had these craters gone? It shows that the comet's surface can either be self-renewing or active,
which is only because it reforms itself after impact, because it is just a rock pile. They learned from Temple 1 too. They impacted it and didn't leave a crater, even though they're going to try and say otherwise, as we'll see. Dr. Brown wrote this to ask Dr. Brownlee why crystalline minerals, as opposed to amorphous, meaning no water, crystals form in water, as compared to minerals that form without water, which doesn't give the crystalline shape, should be found in comets. As I recall, you told me that Brownlee's response was that he didn't believe the data. So data was already coming in that there's crystalline material being found in comets and asteroids, and he goes, I don't believe it because it's too impossible. And if crystalline materials are brought back by stardust, which they were, a good question to ask Brownlee is, how did crystalline material form in outer space? How do you get water, liquid water, to cause crystals to form in outer space? According to all theories for the origin of comets, except for the hydroplate theory, the water in comets should never have been liquid because outer space is too cold, especially where comets are thought to have been formed. And that's true, yet they have found crystalline and other minerals, clays, and other things that can only form in the presence of water, in the presence of liquid water in some cases, completely supporting the premise that they were jettisoned from the earth in the flood of Noah. And now, what did they actually find? Exactly what Walt Brown
predicted. Taking the samples back to the lab, scientists learned another completely unexpected fact about Comet Vil 2. It was not a visitor to our solar system at all. Unlike what had previously been believed, Comet Vil 2 had not originated from another star. It had been born from our own. By comparing the isotopic composition of the particles stardust collected with the samples from our own solar system, it was proven that Comet Vil 2 originated from the solar system.
Now think about this. It originated from the solar system. That's what they concluded. This didn't come from someplace else. It's too much like Earth. It's too much like our solar system.
And contrary to what all the ice on its surface might lead you to believe, the rock at its center was formed under white-hot conditions.
And the only explanation they're going to give for that is that somehow, that item had gotten really close to a solar nebula to get to thousands of degrees, which are chondrules. They're finding chondrules and other things that you have to get between 2,600 and 3,300 degrees. Yet, if that material was jettisoned from the pillars and the places where the crust was landing on the mantle, and it would have turned it to thousands of degrees very easily, and then jettisoned it up into space.
Chondrules and calcium-aluminium inclusions were both found among the samples stardust collected. These are structures that only form under incredibly hot conditions and can be found in other asteroids between Mars and Jupiter. So scientists had to rethink their theory that comets formed in cold conditions at the edge of solar systems, even if they do spend some time there. Both fire and ice go into making comets.
Because stardust brought this material back, and the Stardust space probe that dropped the collection container back on Earth, it still had enough fuel to go back to Temple 1 to go see if it could see the crater that the copper impactor made. Okay, now what they're going to say, the circle right here, that's where they know the Temple 1 copper impactor hit. That's what they know was the location that it hit. When Stardust flew by, this is the area where the impactor hit. Now, you and I can look at that picture and say, we don't see any crater here. That there's nothing there because it hit into a floating rock pile. It didn't create a crater, but they're going to say it created a crater.
The crater that had been left by Deep Impact's payload. The mission was a success. From the images Stardust took, scientists were able to calculate that it was approximately 150 meters across, so 50% larger than they were predicting. From this, they learned that the surface of Temple 1 was a very fluffy material, made from more dust than was expected, and finer in substance than a powdered snowbank. The surface was incredibly porous. In fact, they were able to estimate that 75% of the comet was actually empty space.
Now, think about that. I mean, it so loosely came together, which when you think about anything coming together in space, without an atmosphere, it's just like impossible for a bunch of rock to decide to get together in space. But yet that's what happened. And yet it's so loosely packed, perfectly explained by the hydroplate theory, that like 75% of that was empty space.
The whole thing held loosely together by gravitational forces. From analysis of the plume that had been ejected from Temple 1 after the impact, scientists were able to identify several interesting material components, including clays, silicates, sodium, and even organic material. While not life itself, these heavily rich carbon materials may have been carried to Earth by comets in the past, providing the vital materials that make up life here. Not only that, they were able to see other changes that had taken place on Temple 1's surface. 3 pits that had formerly existed had merged to become one. A cliff face had eroded back around 20 to 30 meters. This indicated that Temple 1's surface was a dynamically changing place, leading to interesting questions about how these formations had formed in the first place that scientists could now puzzle over.
From now until they die centuries into the future, unless they embrace the hydroplate theory. That there was at one point, all the material of this asteroid was ejected with the same velocity, the same trajectory into space with the water environment around it, water molecule environment around it that allowed it all to come together. And it is so loosely held together, it changes its look just by the changing gravitational attraction basically as a building starts to collapse down because of the very loose forces. Your mission was a blunder. This is what this article says, which is not to say that the impact crater was obvious. I was hoping for a splashy feature around an obvious circular hole, but there was no visible splash. It was more subdued than the science team expected it to be. It took some really detailed comparisons of the old and the new pictures from Deep Impact and Stardust to confirm that there really were changes to the surface. After some judicious image processing and seeing things that aren't there, I'm going to add, you can make out an irregular shaped rim about 100 feet or 50 meters across and a mound in the middle. What that crater tells us, co-investigator Peter Schultz said, is that the surface of the comet where we hit it is weak and fragile. It's fluffy. Exactly what HPT would predict, not what any other theory can explain.
Comets are truly fascinating things, and it was thanks to the incredible work of the Stardust probe and the Deep Impact mission that we were able to learn a great deal about their inner composition and workings. While still retaining their beauty, we have pierced through their layers of enigma. We understand that they are not some foreign visitors, but originate here, from our own solar system, and may have even led to the blossoming of life itself on this planet. And it was human ingenuity and precision that allowed these discoveries to be made. So,
glory be to man is what he's saying, and yet they're completely ignoring the god elephant in the room.
The next time you see a comet, with its beautiful tail flaring out across space away from it, it will no longer be quite so mysterious or foreboding. They may even be the reason you are here today. And all it took to learn this was to catch the dust from one and to punch another really, really hard.
If you have the wrong perspective of the past, you will have a wrong perception of the present and a wrong focus on the future. And this is what's caused the blunders. All these were conceived with the wrong idea of what they were going to get to.
And so it's another $100 million project, and they still have the wrong perspective of the past. And that's what I'm trying to do. We all need to do to get the creation perspective of the past brought in there. And you can see his whole talk again on TCCSA, or just see the highlights there.
There's a strange moon of the asteroid Dinkinish. When the Lucy probe was here looking at Dinkinish, it saw this. Oh, another asteroid with a moon. And then it went a little bit further and took another angle at it. And it said, oh, it's an asteroid with a moon that is made up of two components that are contact binaries of the same size. Absolutely impossible, except for the hydroplate theory. Principal investigator for Lucy said in a statement, I would have never expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why the two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out. No, it's not going to be fun. They're never going to figure it out unless they embrace the hydroplate theory premise of how they were sent up into space. Contact binary systems seem to be fairly common. Now there's, oh yeah, this is common to find contact binaries, which was impossible to them a few years ago until they keep finding them everywhere. But scientists hadn't seen one orbiting an asteroid prior to Dinkinish, and we never suspected anything so bizarre. Details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious, and it will remain mysterious until people embrace Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. They'll never figure it out. Scientists were shocked in 1993 when for the first time they saw a moon orbiting an asteroid called Dactyl. They said it was impossible, and then they saw it. Galileo scientists correctly stated that it is virtually impossible, that the moon is a captured object, something created completely separately from light. It is impossible to catch a moon in the vacuum of space. Now, decades later, scientists have found that 17%, more than 245 asteroids have orbiting. And now a moon with a moon can only be explained by the hydroplate theory.
So 30 years ago, it was impossible for an asteroid to have a moon. And now they're finding it on, what, 17% of them. And their theory is just flat out wrong. And the hydroplate theory is flat out right. And they keep on ignoring it. A surprise in NASA's asteroid rock hints Bennu came from an ocean world. Well, what do you think that ocean world is? The space rock was once part of a long-gone ocean world. Where's the ocean world in the universe or in the solar system? It's Earth. And the trickster asteroid, nicknamed as such for baffling scientists. Again, that's because they have the wrong perspective of the past. And if you have the wrong perspective of the past, you're going to have a wrong perspective of the present and a wrong focus on the future. And they're wasting millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars because they don't have that perspective. And it's the same thing when they thought about junk DNA. But let's hear them comment on some more of this.
This is the OSIRIS-REx mission, $1 billion. They designed it to come down and kind of smash onto the surface to bring up some debris that would then, as it pulled away, it would go into the collection chamber. What they found, and they had a time delay before the thrust would move it away from the Bennu asteroid. And what they found out is that time delay almost trashed $1 billion mission because it kept going down. It buried itself. That arm buried itself in the asteroid because it's a loosely held together rock pile. And it fired off just before it would have been, completely, down into the asteroid. This asteroid came from a long gone ocean world, which I say is a little presumptive considering that they and we are living on the ocean world that Bennu came from.
Yeah, So these are all available on that TCCSA YouTube channel. And there's other ones too, like Dr. Jerry Bergman. Oh, I should let you know. We got our Creation Club approved yesterday, so our students got the advisor, and that's awesome. And so then I emailed, who was on my A-list? The A-list of speakers. I forgot about you, Brian. But you've already debated there already. So I emailed Jerry Bergman, Jay Siegert, and who was the last one? Oh, Pastor Kevin Lee, that's the guy who you just saw. And then Fred Williams from Real Science Radio. And I asked him, if we can find a professor who wants to debate this, would you debate them? And I asked Kevin Anderson that a few years ago, and he would do it, but now he died. But Dr. Jerry Bergman said, yeah. So if we can find a professor that's willing to step up to the microphone, Jerry Bergman's going to wax the floor with him, because he's got 9 degrees. He was an outspoken atheist. He wrote articles, and Madeline Marie O'Hare liked them. He knew her. And she liked that. And they asked him, well, how did you become a Christian? He said, science. You know, I was teaching anatomy, and all these fail-safe things into the body just can't happen by chance. And yeah, now he's a creationist, and he's got over 1,000 books and articles published. You know, when I get a creation journal, a peer-reviewed journal, I'm always surprised when he's not in it, because normally he's got an article. And I asked him one time, how can you write so much? I mean, I said, do you sleep? And he said, oh yeah, I sleep. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, when I was going through grad school, I was also working full time. So I had to make every minute count. So if he's in the dentist office waiting to get seen, he's proofreading one of his papers or whatever. So he knows how to get the most out of his day. And so hopefully we'll get a professor who wants to debate that. And then, oh yeah, I was interviewed. You know, I'm doing that talk about errors in our textbooks. I'm trying to get that into the mainstream. I'm trying to get that to be an election issue. Do you want accurate textbooks? And so I was on Kent Hovind's podcast talking about it, and I was on Real Science Radio. And as I'm talking about it, he shows this clip. He said that, you know, he couldn't get it to work, and he couldn't get it to work. And I said, well, you know, we can just watch it later and we can go on. He goes, no, I want to see your expressions. And watch Doug at the bottom. Watch his expressions. They never get old, because that red part, that's the mid-oceanic ridge. That's where the water shot up from the subterranean water chambers. And she uses that to explain that's what they're finding in the comets. And watch Doug's expressions.
So let me know what you think.
This is the most insane space news in a really long time. This asteroid, called Bennu, is 63 million kilometers away. That's 160 times farther than the moon is. Over the last few years, this spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx traveled all the way there, touched its surface, grabbed a sample, and brought it all the way back to Earth. And what they found in that sample is insane. It's rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential to life as we know it, but we've seen that before. The asteroid is also covered in a mineral called serpentine, which looks like this. And these samples look just like the type of rock that we find here in mid-ocean ridges. This is where the stuff from the mantle of the Earth comes up and touches the water. It's underwater. Scientists think that this asteroid could be a chunk of an ancient small ocean world. This could be a piece of an old watery planet that's been traveling through space for billions of years, and we just took a sample of it.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We have a few minor tweaks for, you know, first of all, that watery planet, let's call it Earth,
Oh,
as
yeah.
Kevin Lee likes to say. I wanted to get your reaction, Brian, because when I saw that, I'm like, wow, she works for Walt Brown and Real Science Radio in creating a short for us without us having to do all that production effort.
Yeah, she needs a raise, I think. Man.
Well, what everyone just saw on display was an example of a victim of the government schools, a victim of the deceptions and the errors that Brian has uncovered. That girl, to not even consider that this giant water planet is Earth, but that it's been traveling through space for millions of years, is because she has been victimized by exactly what Brian's been uncovering. And it's actually sad. It's sad to see, but it is instructive as to the work we have to do. Yeah, there's work for us to do. There's a lot of people that have been
victimized by our education system because they believe what's in the textbook is accurate. And I'm pointing out on Tuesday night, it's not accurate. If you can get there and get as many taxpayers as you can to get there, we're going to show you what's inaccurate, undeniably, errors in our textbooks. Yeah, so those are my YouTube channels. If you want to jot this one down, solidifyyourfaith.weebly.com. That'll give you my Rumble sources, my Rumble channels. I've got Education, Not Indoctrination. I've got Revival of Truth. That was an interesting one because there was a pastor in Wisconsin who said, can you do a creation science revival? You got 3 talks Sunday plus Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I said, how about we do a creation science and Sunday, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll do a revival of truth that's been censored. And Monday, we'll take a look behind the vaccine curtain and show you some depositions from some experts on the vaccine. And then Tuesday, we look behind the COVID corruption so we can learn from that and not have that happen again. And then Wednesday, we looked at what the tyrants want to put in place to control us with their digital currency and climate credits and so on. And to that pastor's credit, he said, yeah, do that.
So, yeah. So real quick, is hydroplate theory an older theory or a younger theory?
It's a younger theory. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and he developed it because he was going through South Dakota, and he's got a PhD from MIT. He's running the Benet military lab. He's an Army Ranger. He's just brilliant. And there's like 3 dozen PhDs working for him, plus hundreds of scientists. And he's going through South Dakota, and he hears that somebody claimed they found the Ark on a mountain. And he thought he was a crackpot because he's an evolutionist. But there's nothing to do in South Dakota besides count down the wall drug signs, right? Yeah, right. And so, just to keep his mind engaged, he thought, well, if they did find an Ark on a mountain, that would mean the whole world was underwater. And if the whole world was underwater, that means a whole bunch of plants and animals got buried in mud and turned into fossils. And he thought, well, if fossils are evidence for a flood, where's the evidence for evolution? And he began to ask his highly educated colleagues, what is the evidence is there for evolution? And after 2 years, he didn't have any. And then he came up with the hydroplate, and his PhD is in mechanical engineering in the heat transfer division. And so he really understands the mechanisms and the forces and what has to happen in the earth instead of just, being blinded following catastrophic plate tectonics.
The hydroplate theory, you've stated that it accounts for comets and many asteroids we see in space.
Right.
Do you suspect it's also responsible for the massive craters we see on the near side of the moon?
Bingo. Absolutely. Yep. If it did happen, wouldn't it leave a mark on the moon? And that's why the near side is pounded and the other side is peppered. And one of the errors in the textbook said that they found the Earth's oldest rock near the Hudson Bay in 2008. Well, in 2019, NASA said they found the Earth's oldest rock on the moon. And I told them, we got a theory that gets it up there. We got a theory that makes accurate predictions. And I offered it to the science director, I offered it to the superintendent, and I offered it to the school board. And the lack of curiosity by our science director is just jaw-dropping. Yes?
They would also explain why we found water and DNA on Mars.
Yeah. Yep. That's right, too. And he predicted we'd find salt water on Mars, and that was confirmed. He predicted that asteroids would be rounded boulders, and that's been confirmed. It's like, how do you get rounded boulders in space? Because, it'd have jagged edges. It's got to go through a fast flow of water before it gets shot up there. And he predicted they'd find C14 in old bones, carbon-14, and that was right. And he predicted some other things too. And you can get this book you can get an electronic version of this book for free. You can download it. Go into rsr.org/HPT. RSR, that's Real Science Radio, rsr.org/HPT. And then you're going to see a picture like this, and then right underneath it's going to say 9th edition, and then you can just click on it. And then you got it. And then you can go Command F, and that's going to be, you're going to be able to search it. Search whatever term you want, like radioactivity. And that's the new chapter of this book, is the radioactivity chapter, because he says as those 60 miles of slabs are slamming, all the water's going to erupt and the pressure's going to get released, and then it's going to slam down, and then the pressure will build up and it'll keep going. It'll be fluttering, he calls it. And granite has quartz, feldspar, mica, and hornblende. And quartz is piezoelectric, so when you stretch it or compress it, it sparks. And they've seen light in granite. During earthquakes, they've seen light and stuff, and that can Z-pinch a bunch of material together, and that's how he thinks they fused past iron. Because that's an unanswered question in physics. How do you fuse past iron? And so that's what and that's why he thinks radioactivity, that's the origin of radioactivity, because God said everything was very good after day 6. And is it very good to have uranium out there, which can cause birth defects? And so he thinks that, and if radioactivity came from other stars, it should be all through the planet, all through Earth, but it's not. It's mainly on the continents and mainly by granite. You don't find it in the ocean. And so that's a fascinating thing. And he says with this, you can predict earthquakes with disturbances in the ionosphere with the electrons. And because they're still sweeping this under the rug, this is one click away from being available worldwide. One click away. And they don't do it. And again, I don't understand why. They say, well, there could be typos in it. Well, they just put proofreading copy on it. Let's get the information out there. Well, we want the 9th edition to be perfect. And I said, make the 10th edition perfect. Let's make this one out there. Oh, and as far as seeing the hydroplate, if you get one of my cards, I have a whole playlist for hydroplates. And if you watch that SCSU one.
There's been a lot of recent conjecture that I've seen about a newly theorized deep ocean well below the surface that could be as much as 10 times more water below the surface of the Earth than we see on the surface today. It seems to be gaining popularity in the last few years. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, my question is, hey, how'd the water get down there? Because the Earth is supposed, and that's one of the errors I point out, they say that the Earth used to be molten, and it's like, well, granite's never been molten. Those 4 things that are in it, they all got different specific densities. If it was molten, they'd layer out, but they aren't. So granite's never been molten. Oh, and when you had those 60-mile cliffs crumbling into that hypersonic flow, on Earth you can only get a cliff 5 miles high because then it's going to crush the stuff underneath. And so when, underneath 5 miles of granite, it kind of turns to putty. So there's no way water could be able to seep down there anymore. And yet we have supercritical vents coming up in the Gulf of Mexico. Supercritical water, it's like, well, where did that come from? And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that are pointing to the hydroplate theory. And I am beyond frustrated with our creation organizations who don't give it the time of day. They got their consensus, and they don't want a competing view. And when you get big, you got a budget, you got to pay the bills, and you're selling books that pay the budget. You don't want to have a competing theory selling books. That's my kind of cynical look at it. But I think science should allow multiple hypotheses. And the guy, it flew me down to Houston. Thank God for the Houston Creation Association, or Greater Houston Creation Association. They had the flood model summer. So I spoke in June, somebody else was supposed to speak in July, and then there was supposed to be a roundtable discussion in August. And long story short, they did the roundtable discussion just on Thursday. So it's Kevin Lee and a CPT guy talking. Oh, this is Walt Brown himself. He is today's Isaac Newton. And you can hear him being interviewed on RSR, Real Science Radio, rsr.org, search Walt Brown. That's what colored in the details for me. And 20 years ago, my cousin sent me a copy of Ken Hovind's The Age of the Earth. Has anybody seen that? The Age of the Earth. And it's like, oh, fossils are a sign of a flood, not millions of years. And he showed how evolution was based on lies. My wife and I look at each other, well, that's not what we were taught. I wonder what else they didn't teach us. And so we got his 7 DVD series, and we'd have Hovind night. We'd make popcorn, because he's pretty entertaining. And when our kids were there, and it's like, we didn't know that, we didn't know that. And it's hard to turn off. Yeah, but that connected the dots. And then when I heard the Walt Brown interview on rsr.org, that colored in the details. of what happened during the flood. And ever since then, all I can see is the hydroplate when they discover stuff. And they do have a saying out there, all scientists work for Walt Brown, because then when they make a new discovery, it always validates the hydroplate. That would be safe to assume. The one that I have hope for is ICR. Dr. Randy Galuza, and remember when I said science progresses one funeral at a time? This is one of those examples, because now Randy Galuza is running the ship, and he wanted to know what the hydroplate people were saying, not what people were saying about the hydroplate. And so he invited Kevin Lee to come in and somebody else, maybe Mike Snavely and some other guys, to present to him and his scientists the hydroplate theory. And Kevin Lee started with the evidence with the comets. And it was very well received with one or two exceptions. And and so I have so much respect for Randy Galuza. You know, if you want to promote, if you want to support one of the big ones, I would funnel it to ICR. You know, he just and he's got a biology thing that's cutting edge. This destroys geology, the Big Bang. And then he's got continuous environmental tracking, and Brian does a great talk on that, about how things adapt quickly. You go from no sight, from a sighted cavefish to a blind cavefish in just a generation or two. And so, yeah.
Yeah, Brian, could you give the opposing view, which is the catastrophic, like maybe just, those are the views really that are out there.
Right. And the catastrophic view is a secular model sped up. Just like theistic evolution is a secular model with Jesus slapped on it. And there's a book out there, I've got a couple of them, it's called 20 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics. And you can get it on Amazon. And there's several reasons with problems with plate tectonics. And that's one of the errors. They talk about these convection currents, like water, like boiling water in the earth. Well, there's a crossover density where once it gets 220 miles below the surface, it comes so compressed that it sinks. And so it doesn't come back up again. And so that's a problem with the convection. The other problem I see is how did it start? How do you get this big slab going underneath another slab? What force pushed it down? And then where's all the sediment that should have been scraped off of it? So yeah, those are two perspectives, and yet that's what the major ones are. Oh, and if you want to hear the story behind the story and why it's been censored for so long, go into rsr.org, I think it's /answers, or just search Jane Albright, Albright, Albright. She compares all the flood models, and the third one, she talks about the hydroplate, and then she talks about why it's been censored for so long. And there's some, what would you call it? Some bad things that Christians did in the past. And when we were putting up that video, that website, this is when Bob Enyart was still alive, he said, should we put the controversy up there on the website? And I said, no, let's just have people focus on the theory. And then a year or two later, I said, you know what? No, let's put up the controversy now so the guy has a chance to respond for what he did. It's like if we wait until he's dead and put it up, it's like, well, why didn't you put it up when he could defend himself? So it's up there right now. I think he knows about it. He can defend himself if he wants. So that's the story behind the story. So that might answer some questions too. But there's some sad testimonies out there is about all I can say. And he writes about it in there too. But any other questions? We're right on 7:30, so I want to respect your time, and you got young ones. Any other questions?
We got one more if nobody else does.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
The theory of a firmament, of a water canopy around the Earth, is that something supported by the hydroplate theory?
Well, that's one thing I disagree with the hydroplate. They say that the firmament is the granite. They say the water, the water separates the water from the water. They say the firmament is the granite, but in Genesis 1 it says that birds fly in the firmament of heaven. So I don't really go along with that. I do like and this is just me, because I talk to people, I was at Answers in Genesis at the museum, somebody spoke and I asked him, what about this canopy theory? And he said it doesn't work. And I said, why not? And he said, well, why did God put the stars in the skies? And I said, for signs and seasons. And he said, well, can you see that through 12 feet of ice or mist or whatever? And it's like, well, I don't know. And then he said, and our models don't work. You know, it says that the Earth would be 600 or 6,000 degrees. You couldn't have life. And so I kind of walk away scratching my head thinking, well, you know, if God can take sand and turn it into glass that we can see through, maybe God can take water and make it into something we can see through. And then, you know, just because our models don't work doesn't mean God's models don't work. And then I talked to Carl Baugh. He's a big proponent of the canopy. And I said, you know, Carl, what do you think? You know, I told him about that. And he says, they're right. If it's a vapor canopy, it would be too hot. But if it was a crystalline canopy, then it would work. And what they debunk it by, it's a straw man. They say that the canopy couldn't hold enough water to flood the Earth. And that's not what I'm saying. You know, it's just a filter out there. Because I asked Bob Enyart one time, is it very good to get sunburn and possible cancer from the sun? You know, he says, no, that's not good. And I said, well, maybe that firmament filtered it out. And then I was still talking to Carl Baugh, and I said, what about the hydroplate? And he said, Walt Brown is a good man. And he is. He's a real good man, I think. And he didn't really say about the hydroplate. And I said, could you have both? Could you have the canopy above there, and then the hydroplate, when the fountains of the great deep burst up, broken up, and then the windows of heaven were open, maybe the windows of heaven was the canopy. And he said, yeah, you could do that. And so that's kind of where I am. It's kind of, it's like, it's not either or, it's like and both is how I look at it. Because something was clearly different before the flood. You know, you got those big dragonflies, you got people living longer. I think the whole world was a hyperbaric chamber so that you would heal quickly, and something changed. And I think it could be the canopy, but I don't know. Yeah, good question, though. Good question. Any other questions?
That starts making me think about what the Russians found at that crazy deep borehole they drilled.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's 7 miles down. Yeah, and what they found was crushed granite with salt water.
Really?
Yeah, that shocked them. And that just goes along with the hydroplate. And they had to stop drilling because when they'd pull up the drill, the granite was under so much pressure, it was like putty, and it would just fill in. So every time they pulled up the bit, it would fill in. So that's how come they had to stop. But before that, they found crushed granite with salt water, hot salt water.
And you said earlier that the presence of granite, like on the Earth at all, by itself debunks the theory of evolution.
Well, yeah.
It couldn't exist from a molten world that formed it.
Well, it debunks the Big Bang theory, you know, because we're supposed to be a molten Earth. And that's making planets, they can't do it either, because the theory goes you go from dust to pebbles to rocks to boulders to planetesimals, which are about the size of Rhode Island, and then you get the planets. But those things break apart at the boulder level and even the dust level. And you know, Kevin Lee, he says orbital physics, you can't put stuff together. It's just going to bang off. It's not going to stick together. So they have problems with that. They have problems with star formation. And they have problems with the expanding universe. You know, it's accelerating. And so they have, and that spiral galaxy, so they have to invent dark matter and dark energy, which is 96% of the universe. And if your theory can only explain 4% of the universe, I think it's time for a new theory. You know, a lot of these talks are on the YouTube channel. You know, feel free to check those out. And then on Tuesday, if you can fit it into your calendar, if you can get to the E-Free Church Tuesday evening with as many taxpayers as possible, and let's get their meeting just packed. You know, just take a look at their textbooks.
Just get the school board members there. That's the way I would do it.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, and it's shocking, you know. And I spoke, and you can see on my YouTube channel, we recorded my comments, so you can see what I said. And I'm going to be going back because you know I was under the assumption that everybody wants accurate textbooks. That was a bad assumption, and I think taxpayers and legislators should know that not everybody wants accurate textbooks.
Can't you look getting into the Catholic schools? You'd think they'd eat this up.
Well, that's an interesting thing, too, because like Notre Dame and St. John's, they teach evolution, some form of evolution, which shoots themselves in the foot. You know, I knew a guy, when our kids were growing up, we'd play baseball at the park, and one of them was a really good baseball player, but he ended up, I said, when he graduated, I said, did they teach evolution at Cathedral? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what do they teach in Bible class? And he said, well, in religion class, they teach creation. And I said, so which one's true? And he said, well, it depends which class I'm in. So what he learned there was he decides what's truth. And so later on, he was living with a girl. And I said, man, you got to marry her. He goes, yeah, I know. But, when you start, and that's the foundation. When you start eroding away the creation message, everything else falls apart. You don't find a liberal church with a 6-day creation. And so that's where the battle is. And I look at the chaos in the world, and that's just God's truth versus Satan's lies. And ground zero is creation versus evolution. And there's two perspectives of the past, but they're only being taught one perspective. And so a lot of times when I'm at St. Cloud State, what are you doing here? It's like, I just want to give you an opportunity to think.
They don't teach that anymore.
What's that?
Thinking.
Oh, yeah. Right. Because I spend a lot of time on, the students know what to think, they just don't know how to think. And when I meet somebody who knows how to think, I go, where'd you go to school? 95% of the time it's homeschool. And there was one student who said Anoka. And I said, really? She said, I said, how can you think so clearly? She said, well, my dad had to deprogram her every night. Every night. He'd say, what did they teach you? And then he had to correct it every night. And if you're not doing that in the public school, your kid might come home thinking they're a cat. Or Bobby might think he's Susie. And you don't want to put your young minds in that environment. It's going to be a heartache in the future, I think.
Almost everybody here, not all, but
Oh, praise the Lord. There's hope for America. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate it.
I'm
sure you'll stick around if you have questions.